Early explorations. In the 1400s, European explorers tested uncharted oceans in search of a better trade route to Asia. They left their homelands filled with a desire for gold, glory, and for spreading Christianity. In just over 250 years, their ventures had destroyed and built empires at a great cost in human life. Their efforts, however, linked people of different cultures and ended forever the isolation of the world's major civilizations. Age of exploration. Europe in the 1300s had depended on spices from Asia. Such spices as pepper, cinnamon, and nutmeg were in great demand. Used chiefly to flavor and preserve meat, spices were also used for perfumes, cosmetics, and medicine. The spice trade was controlled by Arab and Phoenician merchants. Chinese and Indian traders sold spices to Arab merchants, who then reaped huge profits in the sale of the spices to Venetians. Europeans, eager to amass quick fortunes through direct trade with Asians, began to look for quicker routes eastward. Because the Mongols by the mid-1300s could no longer guarantee safe overland passage, Europeans were forced to consider the possibility of sea routes to Asia. Several motivations led Europeans into an era of exploration. Not only did merchants seek a profitable trade with Asia, but also church leaders sought to halt the expansion of Islam to spread Christian teachings. Learning and imagination also played a part. Renaissance thinkers had expanded the European worldview to include new possibilities for exploration and discovery. Overseas voyages would end Europe's isolation and set it on the path of worldwide expansion. They would also prepare the way for the rise of the world's first global age. Technology of exploration. Open water ocean sailing, necessary to find a water route to Asia, required sailors trained in navigation, accurate maps, and ocean-going ships. For exploration to succeed, ships had to be able both to leave coastal waters and sight of land and to return home. Ancient navigators stayed close to the coast, using landmarks to determine their position. Later, sailors who traveled beyond sight of land used the positions of stars and the sun to determine in which direction they were traveling. Hourglasses told them how long they had traveled. Keeping track of speed, direction, and time theoretically enabled a captain to tell where the ship was. However, these calculations were very inaccurate. The compass, of Chinese origin, enabled sailors to determine geographical direction. By 1100, sailors used the astrolabe, perfected by the Arabs, to determine the altitude of the sun or other heavenly bodies. But in practice, standing on the deck of a heaving ship, few ship captains had the skill and patience that the astrolabe required. Maps were another problem for early navigators. Most maps were wildly inaccurate, drawn from scattered impressions of travelers and traders. Cartographers or map makers filled their parchments with lands only found in rumor or legend. Cartographers' skills gradually improved. By about 1300, coastal charts showed the Mediterranean coastline with a great degree of accuracy. During the Renaissance, works by the Hellenistic astronomer Ptolemy reappeared in Europe. His maps, improved over the centuries by Byzantine and Arab scholars, gave Europeans a new picture of the world. Ptolemy also introduced the grid system of map references based on the coordinates of latitude and longitude still in use today all over the world. Innovations were also made in the construction of ships. Late in the 1400s, shipwrights began to outfit ships with triangle-shaped lateen sails perfected by Arab traders. These sails made it possible for ships to sail against the wind, not simply with it. Shipwrights also abandoned using a single mast with one large sail. Multiple masts, with several smaller sails hoisted one above the other, made ships travel much faster. In addition, moving the rudder from the ship's side to the stern made ships more maneuverable. In the 1400s, a ship called a caravel incorporated all these improvements. The caravel was up to 65 feet in length, with the capability of carrying 130 tons of cargo. Because a caravel drew little water, it allowed explorers to venture up shallow inlets and to beach the ship to make repairs. A Venetian mariner called the caravels the best ships that sailed the seas. The caravels also carried new types of weapons, rifles, and cannons. Portugal leads the way. Portugal was the first European country to venture out on the Atlantic Ocean in search of spices and gold. Between 1420 and 1580, Portuguese captains pushed farther and farther down the west coast of Africa in search of a sea route to Asia. Although Prince Henry the Navigator, son of King John I of Portugal, was not a sailor, never making an ocean voyage, he brought together mapmakers, mathematicians, and astronomers to study navigation. He also sponsored many Portuguese exploratory voyages westward into the Atlantic and southward down Africa's west coast. In the early 1400s, Henry's explorers discovered the Azores, the Madeira Islands, and Cape Verde Islands. These discoveries were the foundation of what in the 1500s became the Portuguese Empire. In August 1487, Bartholomew Dias left Portugal, intent upon finding the southern tip of Africa. In 1488, his expedition discovered the southern tip of Africa, which was later named the Cape of Good Hope. Dias's voyage proved that ships could reach East Asia by sailing around Africa. In 1497, 4 ships led by Vasco da Gama sailed from Portugal for India. The expedition rounded the Cape of Good Hope, made stops at trading centers along the east coast of Africa, and landed at Calicut on the west coast of India in 10 months. There, Da Gama found Hindus and Muslims trading fine silk, porcelain, and spices that made the glass beads and trinkets of the Portuguese appear shoddy. Da Gama tried to persuade the ruler of Calicut and Muslim merchants in India to trade with the Portuguese. He had little success and returned home. In Portugal, however, Da Gama was regarded as a natural hero. He had pioneered a water route to India, and he had provided a glimpse of the riches that could come from direct trade with the East. Spain's quest for riches. In the late 1400s, Spain ended a long period of internal turmoil and wars against the Moors. Under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, Spain entered the race for Asian riches by backing the expeditions of an Italian navigator named Christopher Columbus. Columbus crosses the Atlantic. In 1492, Christopher Columbus approached Queen Isabella with an intriguing plan: to reach India by sailing west across the Atlantic. For years, Columbus had tried unsuccessfully to persuade other European rulers to finance his voyage. With Queen Isabella, his persistence paid off. In August 1492, Columbus sailed from Spain with 3 small ships. He calculated the distance to India to be 700 leagues, about 2,200 nautical miles. He knew that the actual distance might be greater. To calm the crew's fears, he showed them a log that understated the distance they had sailed. The days out of sight of land were on, and the terrified sailors begged Columbus to turn back. After a false sighting of land, the crews began to talk of mutiny. Columbus reluctantly agreed to turn back if they did not reach land within 3 days. After midnight on the second day, the expedition sighted land. In the morning, Columbus and his men went ashore, becoming the first Europeans to step foot on one of the islands of the Bahamas. Columbus wrote of the inhabitants, "The islanders came to the ship's boats, swimming and bringing us parrots and balls of cotton thread, which they exchanged for glass beads and hawk bells. They took and gave of what they had very willingly, but it seemed to me that they were poor in every way. They bore no weapons, nor were they acquainted with them." Believing he was off the coast of India, Columbus called the islanders Indians. Columbus spent the next 3 months exploring the islands Hispaniola, present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and Cuba in search of gold. Although he found enough gold to raise Spanish hopes, he saw no evidence of the great civilizations of Asia. When Columbus returned to Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella gave him the title Admiral of the Ocean Sea, Viceroy and Governor of the islands he hath discovered in the Indies. Columbus made 3 more voyages to the Caribbean islands and South America, seeking proof that he had discovered a new route to Asia. In 1506, he died, certain that he had. Even without sure proof, it was difficult for anyone to dispute Columbus's claim. Maps of the time did not show any landmass between Europe and Asia. It was not until 1507 that another Italian explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, suggested that Columbus had discovered a new world. In honor of Vespucci, the name America began to appear on maps that included the newly discovered lands. Dividing the world. Both Spain and Portugal wanted to protect their claims in the Americas and turned to the Pope for help. In 1493, the Pope drew a line of demarcation, an imaginary line running down the middle of the Atlantic from the North Pole to the South Pole. Spain was to have control of all the lands to the west of the line, while Portugal was to have control of all the lands east of the line. The Portuguese, however, feared that their line was so far to the east that Spain might take over their Asian trade. As a result, in 1494, Spain and Portugal signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, an agreement to move the line of demarcation farther west. The treaty divided the entire unexplored world between just two powers, Spain and Portugal. Voyage of Magellan. In 1519, an expedition led by Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese soldier of fortune, set sail from Seville under the Spanish flag to find a western route to Asia. The 5 ships and 260-man crew sailed across the Atlantic and made their way along the eastern coast of South America, searching every bay and inlet for this route. Along the coast of Argentina, crews of 3 of ships attempted a mutiny because Magellan had decided to halt the expedition until spring. Magellan executed the captain who had instigated the mutiny, regained control of the fleet, and resumed the expedition. Finally, near the southern tip of South America, the ships reached a narrow water passageway now called the Strait of Magellan. The ships threaded their way through the maze of rocky islands in the 350-mile-long strait. Strong currents and unpredictable gales separated one ship from the other, and its crew forced its return to Spain. Another was shipwrecked. The 3 remaining ships finally passed through the strait into the South Sea, discovered and named 7 years earlier by Vasco Núñez de Balboa. Because the water was so calm, Magellan renamed it the Pacific Ocean. The fleet then sailed nearly 4 months before reaching land. Water and food ran out, and some sailors died before the ships reached the present-day Philippines. Caught in a skirmish between a local chief and his enemy, Magellan was killed. The surviving crew escaped and sailed for Spain. In 1522, after 3 years at sea, the last ship with its 18 survivors arrived at Seville, completing the first circumnavigation, or circling of the globe. The spices they brought back barely covered the cost of the voyage, but the expedition had a value far beyond money. It proved that the world was round and much larger than anyone had believed, that the oceans of the world were connected,